Here I stand, watching. Here I have stood, reaching. From when the ice retreated in that last big warming, watching, reaching over Mendip. Crown shy, leaning sunward, spine tapped, stretching starward, as if sprouted arms beneath me. Strip my body for your tools, arrows biting, axes that ground and spades that broke and readied ground. For sowing, growing on the Lord's terms, on the king's terms, on the father's or the squire's. Wheels spoking us into a future chosen for a chosen few. And still here I stand, watching. Here I have stood, reaching, as you hummed your harvest blessings, brought your babes for healing, full of fear and hope and wishing for a sip of sap. A cleft then passed right through me, shaded by my awning through her budding years, hand to bark, a vigil, the ward becoming guardian as our bound wounds healed together. And so here I stand, have stood, watching, reaching, connecting all things living to the great beyond all knowing, beyond our learning. And just when I thought no breathing thing could break me, no squall take me, rot, wretch, cough, crack, owl, nuthatch, hawkmoth, flee to God knows where, voices crying, clear out your dead, and be quick about it, funds are drying up, the earth is drying out, ash to ashes, dust to dust, the sound of chainsaws echo out across the Eber Gorge. And now here I stand, weeping. Here I stand, dying, weeping, still just reaching as my leaves draw ever closer and death draws closer still. Come, bring your wishes. Come, bring your babes. All the spaces I have left are leaving pools of light. Let them be light. Let my lesions be lessons. Let us be legions, stand together in the spaces and then filling them with hope, filling them with dreams, or as the ice melts once again, leaving them to just be.
Wow, that's been really, I haven't actually seen all of that before, but I've heard it within the piece. So it's, I think for our audiences today, that's a really incredible summary of kind of, or snapshot of the project that you made together, but also some of that and the process and also the response, given that a storm kind of blew in halfway through that. So can I just quickly start then, if I wouldn't mind asking each one of you, just to explain a little bit about your individual practice and how that worked within this collaboration and how the collaboration came about. So maybe we just start with you, Gwyn, given that we've just seen you in action.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Karenza. So my name's Gwyn. I am in my normal day job, a composer, musician, workshop facilitator, performer. And in this piece, I was a co-author, or as a kid in Windwhastle Primary School once said, when I asked them, I asked the kids, do you know what a composer is? And they said, and I said, there's no wrong answers. I would just take any answer. And one of them said, is a composer when you put a load of leaves into a bucket and just wait for them to turn into something else? And I think that's kind of That's kind of what my role has been in this process. I've just been gathering leaves and words from so many different places, putting them into a big cauldron, stewing them up with other people's, and also nature, the ultimate director of the entire piece, as we've just seen, and coming out with something quite different than I could have imagined.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Jason?
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Jason Singh. I'm sound artist, and yes, I worked with sound and lots of different listening technologies. I work in spatial audio, and also run music workshops, and yeah, compose and perform.
And we'll get into it in a bit, but they've done some wonderful examples of recording and what you can record, which I think might surprise and interest lots of people. And Chris, what's your role within the project?
So yes, my name's Chris. My background is in wildlife filmmaking, so I'm primarily a more visual artist. So working just with sound has been a challenge, and we'll get into that as well, I think, a bit later on in the conversation. But yeah, my role really is, well, one, I live on the edge of Mendip, so I'm kind of within the landscape, so knew it quite well. And for Jason and Gwyn, kind of Jason a bit further away, and Gwyn living in Western, and my role really was to kind of interpret some of that landscape and the wildlife and the nature into this project, and working with these guys to bring the voice of the natural world both to the people that we spoke to and collaborated with, but also to the audience that heard the piece. So we kind of ended up calling me a nature interpreter was my eventual role on the project when we worked it out.
And just could you, between you, sort of describe the project, because we've sort of mentioned it in lots of snippets of way, a 360 audio, working with young people. There's so many elements within this project which come together so beautifully. Could you sort of explain the project to us, do you think, and the name itself as well, of course? Yes, Jason.
Well, I think we've all got our own interpretations of what we feel the project was and is. But I think for myself, primarily, it was a listening project, and putting myself and ourselves in situations and spaces where we could listen, and then present those recordings of what we listened to and how we listened back to an audience.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, definitely a listening project. And because a lot of my work was about meeting the community and meeting the land through the community and the community through interactions with the land. It's how do we listen to ourselves, to our insides and to each other, and that kind of feeding into the word element of it, which weaves all the way through the piece that we've presented.
And not to keep banging the drum, but the word I've written down at the top of my little notes here is listening. So I think definitely, that was what this project was all about. And it's, listening to multiple different, in multiple different ways, I suppose. So from listening to the people in the amazing workshops that Gwyn did, to listening to the natural world, but also listening in very different ways to the landscape in its deep time. We literally put our ears to the rocks and listen to those. We listen to stories of people that have come and gone, and whose legends kind of live on in the Mendips, and through the stories that people tell, the different ways they tell those stories, but also listening to the wildlife and the natural world. And I think again that video is just an amazing example of when the natural world spoke really clearly. It wasn't always there when we listened. I personally tried to record the dawn chorus about 7 or 8 times on this project, and most of the times it just failed. For various reasons, it just didn't work, and it wasn't ready to speak to us. But I think on that day where we recorded the Ash to Ashes piece, which is all about the pain of the dying of the ash trees on Mendip. Ash is a hugely important tree in this landscape. But with ash dieback is really struggling, and we're due to lose a huge percentage of our ash trees. So that was what that piece was about. And as we were recording it, as you've seen and heard, the most incredible storm came through, and the landscape and the natural world spoke alongside Gwyn's beautiful words, and
Mm.
Jason's amazing recording. So yeah, deep listening, I think, is the key thing here.
I love
Yeah, sorry, Logan. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I love the way, Jason, you talk about nature not performing for us on command, and that idea of like how it's not just a resource for us to use, like in every element of the way. And so, yeah, there were times when nature wasn't ready to speak to us. And when we first started walking the land together, it felt quite inhospitable. It took us time to meet it and for it to be ready to meet us. But that clip when we were basically surrounded by this natural amphitheater that Chris had found of ash trees in various different stages of death and living, and yeah, and it felt like in that moment like an incredible and unexpected collaboration with nature, and we couldn't have scripted it. And I had to really work on my perfectionism to let the giggle go. I was like, but I giggle. They were like, when we cannot replay the storm for you, you're just gonna, it's proof you're human. And I'm like, okay, fine. But so that is exactly the way that it ended up in the piece.
But it wasn't just the landscape that wasn't always ready to speak to us. It's true that you know, some of our workshops and meetings with the people, they also were not all that welcoming to begin with. You know, they didn't necessarily trust us from the beginning, which I think is fair. You know, we're people that were coming in and trying to, you know, do this project, which, you know, as we're probably sharing now, is not necessarily all that easy to explain what we were trying to do. So yeah, the people also weren't always ready to talk to us, which I think, again, you know, is fair enough. And it took us to listen in different ways and to talk to them in different ways to kind of draw those their words out as well. But I think that's the most valuable thing is listening in different ways to hear what people are trying to say, as well as the landscape.
Yeah, and I suppose it's worth saying that, I mean, this project has been in gestation for, you know, good part of a year, and I think that says a lot around how you build trust. But I mean, maybe you could say something. There's so much to say about this project, but maybe we could say a little bit something about how it maybe changed, how you start your starting point to where you ended up, because I know that went through a bit of a transformation.
I think a part of it was kind of, we'd had a framework in terms of like the things that we wanted and the places that we wanted to explore, along with the experts and people in communities and landscapes and spaces. But we didn't know in terms of the direction of what we, you know, of where it was going. We didn't want to kind of have that sort of prescriptive idea of the projects, because there were so many elements and sums of it, you know, of the parts. And just like, you know, what Chris and Gwyn said, there was lots of different moments where we had to also step into the headspaces as facilitators, as composers, as people meeting people, and people meeting landscape, and politics. You know, so there was a lot of different things, and it was a slow process. And I don't think, I mean, even now with the, you know, where we are now in this place with this chat we're having now, the processing of view in, view out will continue for a long time, because we met so many situations that, you know, were deeply sensitive, and life-changing and life-affirming, you know, both as practitioners and also as people meeting people. I live in South Devon, and, you know, so I was the furthest away from Mendip. And so there was this kind of thing of like, you know, it's a different place and it's a different landscape. But with my own family's history of displacement from land, meeting people in new places, so many questions, you know, and so many triggers also came up, you know, throughout the project. So I think, you know, the sort of, we are where we are now, having presented the piece at, you know, at Sovereign, and then it now sort of living, having a space online. But I think the processing of it and the kind of what it was will continue for quite a while, for me, you know, anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That was really my experience too. And we sort of walked in there are so many different languages within this project, so many different ways of interpreting the land and meeting the land, from the kind of the expert language that Jason's talking about, and to like we met so much resistance from young people initially, like nature is boring. Why do I want to meet this? This is not for me, which is also a valid response. And so if you go into one of those spaces with an agenda to convert somebody or to connect somebody in a prescriptive way, you're going to get a particular reaction. But just to go and experience, and walking around on one of our first walks around South Ward with me and Chris, and the young people, just experiencing that, like feeling the touch of a spider's web for the first time, tasting a slowberry together, finding an eye in a birch tree, that kind of communal discovery led to, and just talking, like listening and talking to people as we walked, that slow build of trust and language and connection and communication. It's why I'm so resistant to the word education and to do with anything that I do, because I feel like it's so much more about experience and encounter. That's the way that I want to work. And some of those encounters are crunchy, and I feel internal resistance too. And all of those crunchy moments are also in the piece, you know. We start with all of the dry stone walls up, and then gradually they crumble, which for me was the journey of the whole piece too, when we were, you know, we went from that place to, and it wasn't just young people we worked with people seeking sanctuary, recently arrived in this country too. We worked with an incredible neurospicy theatre group called Open Door, who rang out a wish ritual to the cliff tops of wishes collected from people all over Western. And this continuous process of handing over and listening within land to ourselves and to each other, and the walls gradually coming down.
Yeah, and we had to be open to being educated, I think, as much, if not more, than the people we were talking to. We learned, I think, so much. But I think you're right, Gwen. It's not, this notion of trying to educate the masses is, you know, it's kind of in there, isn't it? I think literally that line is really dangerous, I think. But it turned from being well, it never was that, but yeah, into a very much two-way conversation with the people, with the landscape, and amongst ourselves as well. You know, I think we're always learning from each other, which I think is one of the best things I've taken from this, and I know you two, I think, agree as well. We all learned so much from each other, and sharing our practices, and just keeping talking and helping each other through this whole through these tough times, through the spikier meetings we've had, through the times when we've been out and the land hasn't spoken to us. Just that collaborative way of working that we've kind of developed has been one of the most special things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear, you know, that process you've been through, because, you know, hopefully, you know, across Nature Calling, we had a real ambition to bring artists and working in that collaborative approach with the national landscapes as a landscape, but also reaching out and engaging with new audiences, as we said in our brief, but actually in your case with Western Supermare and with the local producers of Superculture, who obviously have that kind of embedded relationship with the area. And you said, like, so you just don't know. I mean, we didn't go for a tried and tested, here's a group who like to go rambling and they'll understand the landscape. And I think what's been so fascinating about your project is so many layers. And for the people who might not have experienced it, and you can see my image back here in the Sovereign Centre in Western, and you took over that empty shop and had this installation. I think part of the incredible experience and immersive experience was the 360 sound and what that really brought. I really want to get into a bit about some of the process that you did, Gwyneth, but maybe we can just quickly talk maybe a bit more technically, maybe Jason, sort of looking in your direction, about because one of the surprising things I found within the work, as well as, you know, obviously the beautiful words, the beautiful stories, but was the music. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit about some of that aspect that we find in the piece, Jason.
Yeah, so kind of what you're referring to there is these biophilic soundscapes that were created from electrical impulses being generated by trees and plants and mushrooms. And I work with a technology that converts electrical signals into music, into notation. And we use this technology to both to listen and to kind of, you know, bring people into the story of what we were trying to create. in a very kind of open way, you know, of like, you know, what does a dandelion sound like? You know, could it create music? Does it speak? You know, we had all these different just questions and things. Nothing was ever set in stone of like, this is a this and this is what this is going to do. It was very much about just looking at ways of having an inroad into, you know, into kind of creating a dialogue and a discussion with people. So so there are soundscapes that are generated by ash tree, beach, and other sort of textures that were sort of created from the land itself. And so that was kind of one side of it. And then I worked with lots of different microphone technologies, hydrophones, kind of putting them down into the soil, into water, microphones that were kind of very sensitive to enclosed spaces, binaural microphones for sort of 3D, you know, sort of headphone experiences. And then as I'm an associate artist for D&B Audio Technic, the kind of this, well, what felt was the right way to move forward was to kind of then present all of these ways that we recorded into an installation that would be this 360 audio piece, you know, using D&B's soundscape technology, which, without getting into the deep technicals of it, is a kind of object orientated technology which allows you to place sound in various places and spaces, so that listeners can get, you know, the kind of the optimum listening experience no matter where they are in the room. And you know, as well, kind of as somebody who works with sound, I'm not really a technician. I kind of hear and experience things that I then work with the technologies that will allow me to recreate those experiences. And some of them are hyper real, some of them are quite, you know, vivid, and there's not always the language. But working with D&B, they really do give me the kind of the access and the platform to really take apart their audio system and, you know, kind of repurpose it and explore, you know, what can be done outside of, say, a musical concert or, you know, a kind of performance scenario. And some of the feedback that we had, you know, with the piece at the Sovereign Centre, it was remarkable. You know, as someone who kind of firmly and often quite strongly has an opinion about sound and how people, you know, how I would like people to experience this incredible thing that they are able to experience with these instruments that they have. Just hearing people's comments and, you know, seeing people physically moved by what they were experiencing, and people, you know, people saying themselves, I've never heard anything like this in my life. You know, I didn't know sound could be so emotional.
Wow, that is brilliant. And I think we definitely will get into some of that feedback. But just to say again, you know, from my experience, and if people can't quite sort of grasp it, I mean, there was a point where, Gwyneth, you were reading a bit of your poetry and you were walking, and not only could you hear your footsteps, it felt like you were physically walking around my head. You know, you could sort of hear you as you walked around. And I think that quality of sound immersion, like you say, is an experience. It's something we can talk about, but you generally have to experience it, which you know, it's brilliant. And could we just then, I mean, so much of the piece is your wonderful words, Gwyneth, but I know about where those words came from, but I just wondered whether you could really talk about that process of pulling all those words and stories, and maybe a bit around the narrative arc of the piece itself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Corinza. Yeah, I think maybe just to go back to the composting analogy, as you said, like, we had the benefit of a slow brewing process over the course of 9 or 10 months, where the three of us walked the land in different seasons and different emotional states and at different points of the process, and met each other through the land and listened to the land through each other's practices as well. So we had like all of those conversations, and we also had conversations with the members of like the National Landscape team, who are incredibly passionate about the lands that they are custodians and guardians of. So we had those walks. We talked to people who actually work closely with the land itself. A dry stone waller called Tracy, who describes the slow meditative process of building a wall and how much that means to her. And that kind of formed the spine of the words of the piece, really, this idea of walls and what they might mean. Farmers, and then these amazing conversations with young people, both in nature in Weston and out in nature in the Mendip Hills as well. So all of these conversations and encounters, and then obviously the voice of nature itself, the lament of the ash to ashes that we just heard there, and the voice of the ancestors that we went down into Goat Church Cavern and just sat in the dark and they're still and listened, and it's like the stones spoke to us. We've had some pretty deep experiences just in silence as part of this project. And then the voice of Eliza, who is a spirit of a woman, wife of a lead miner who died by violence, her husband suffering from lead-induced psychosis, and her finding her voice somehow through this project rather than just being a spooky tale that is told and passed down. So, yeah, I think there were just this huge collection of words and experiences and responses and dialogues and crunchy bits and surprising bits and magical bits. And so many bits from the kids too, like Jason talking about the listening to the bracket fungus that's in there. And then at one point, one of the kids was like, if we hold hands, can we hear our inside music? And I love that moment of like, what if can we listen to each other in a new way? Just so every line in there is sort of loaded with layers and layers of people talking. And I know it sounds weird, but I just got out of the way at the last minute and it fell out. Once that the walls had revealed themselves, and it starts from that first encounter that we had on the open day. We are now entering the national landscape. Now we are exiting the national landscape. These walls that we build for ourselves, both in reality and internally, that keep us separate from ourselves, from each other and the world around us.
Yeah, and I think that and I think you've mentioned it before, this advocating for the voices in the piece, and that you've mentioned some the characters, I suppose, from the past to the current, and for the future. And I wondered, Chris, as well, within your sort of discipline as a documentary maker, and that advocating for nature, for the land. And I know sort of moving from a visual medium into a sonic medium, sort of.
And I think also for me, moving from my background is as a scientist. So I was, scientific degree, and I kind of don't, the work I do as a filmmaker, for some reason I don't kind of classify as being artistic. I mean, it's kind of crazy now, I kind of break it down, but for me to come into this and for Jason to kind of invite me to be part of this project as an artist was kind of also a big step. So for me, trying to take that rational scientific side of my brain, which is where I do most of my advocating for the natural world, with facts and figures and beautiful pictures, hopefully, and ideally David Attenborough's voice on top of it, into this kind of very different space where we're hearing first of all, it's in the artistic space, there's no visuals, and then we're just trying to let the land speak, and all these incredible people that we heard speak come through was a huge kind of leap for me, and one that I've been hugely grateful for these two, especially for their kind of support on this journey of kind of learning to trust myself as an artist, or believe in myself as an artist. It's been an amazing kind of personal journey as well. But yeah, I think I think as I said at the start, a lot of my job felt like this kind of interpretation role. We were kind of finding lots of different layers and finding different ways, as Gwyn's been saying, to speak to different people. So from the from some of those more scientific people who perhaps like to list out a lot of the things that you see on a walk, to people who just want to sit and listen, like Jason, and hear everything, and again just trust that we can interpret between all these things,
Mm.
and listen to people who can tell us stuff. When we took the Open Door group out, the neurospicy theatre group that Gwyn mentioned, that was an amazing experience for me, because I was ready to do my spiel and tell them what I knew about the landscape. And as soon as I started, someone kind of interrupted me, and it became immediately clear, knew way more than I did about the the geological history, the social history, and a lot of the kind of the wildlife stuff as well. About ash trees and hawthorn trees, and the deep kind of pagan and roots of those species. And so to allow them to take over, and them to talk about their experience and what they knew about it, I think was a beautiful kind of moment for me. And again, it's about this conversation between us, people, land, and actually when we showed the piece, they came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for letting me talk. Normally when I start talking, I get shut down, and people want to tell me stuff, they want to educate me, to go back to Gwyn's point.
Yeah.
But that was a moment where we needed to be educated, and we needed to listen in that kind of deep listening way again. So I think, like Gwyn says, I think the compost analogy is a great one, and Gwyn's, I'm not sure it really helps to complete the analogy and say that Gwyn's a massive bin for all this stuff.
Yeah. You put that on your CV.
But the way she has assimilated all this stuff in her compost bin of a mind and allowed it to come out is exceptional. And just I think a big shout out to Gwyn for all of this, because I was there a lot of it, and I remembered, I reckon, about 10-15% of what Gwyn managed to remember and assimilate and bring out in her incredible words. And likewise with Jason, some of his recordings, through some alchemy of whatever it is, just fitted the words perfectly, fitted what we were trying to say, or not even what we were trying to say, what the landscape and the people were trying to say.
Sorry, Chris. I was just saying, I just love that use of the word alchemy, because there is so much magic within this piece. I mean, there's magic within landscape, but it's the magic within the storytelling. And Jason, you said a phrase to me once about the need for visual stimulation through sound. We were listening to the landscape, but I'm pretty sure we were also imagining we could see the landscape and also feel. And definitely. I wonder what you guys could sort of say something about that. I mean, without maybe going too far into my own witchy interests, but I mean, there's sort of the spirit and the kind of literal magic, that came through, and even manifesting in the sort of the wish rituals and things like this. So I wonder if we can move ever so slightly into those realms.
Well, I think this, one thing that really came through is that meeting people in Western, up in Mendip, people weren't afraid to speak outside of logic and rational mind, so part of the kind of the history of witches and magic and spirituality, of those places, there was moments where we felt that in the present day. So it wasn't something that was kind of like harkening back to this time when people were like that, or it felt very much that people were very open to speak about how they felt and what they felt the land did and what the land was doing. And there was moments where we had experiences as we were kind of walking in places, and Chris said something, and then all of a sudden from the distance we'd hear these sounds that we couldn't place. What is that? Was that a voice? Was it a pallet truck? And we'd have these really beautiful, almost supernatural experiences, and sort of hypernatural experiences, and it was remarkable, and so presenting those things back into the piece in ways that, it wasn't literal of like, oh, now this is a this. There was underscores of sounds that we layered that just sat there, and I feel like, those conversations about the things that are not literal, or the things that we aren't quantifiable or are able to sit in statistics, they are hugely important. That is also what makes up this thing of the national landscape, stuff that is hidden, stuff that is unseen, stuff that is not you know, you can't speak about it. You can feel it, you can sense it. It's a subtle thing that exists around us. And what was really amazing, truly amazing, was that people weren't afraid to speak about that, or we weren't, you know, the land wasn't afraid to show us that either. It was deeply spiritual and deeply otherworldly.
Oh, sounds amazing. I'm enthralled. Do you want to say anything more about that, Gwyneth? Because I know, like, especially if something, maybe even the impact of something as simple as the wish rituals, for instance.
Yeah, well, that was really like this project became clear quite early on, had a life of its own, and we were like merely just sort of like following the thread of it. What we planned to happen is not what unfolded, and so we're just like, okay, let's just surrender and turn up to this space and listen and be open. And one of these things was Open Door, these bookends of meeting with this theatre group. And the second time that we met them, through the period of between meetings, one of their beloved members had died. They'd lost him, Phil. And this was the first time that they were meeting together since losing their friend. And we just handed one of the wish bells onto this absolutely incredible, like, it's almost, what is it that you call him, Jason? You had a really good word for him. He's like a shaman. A shaman of Western.
Definitely a shamanic man.
Yeah, to lead this ritual. And then we realized partway through that Phil's wish was actually one of the wishes in the hat that we were singing up to the cliffs. And it was just, there were so many moments like that of kind of profound coincidence, these glimmers of something, call it God, call it odd, but something truly magical that was much bigger than us. Moving through the project that allowed us to meet, drop into our hearts, like in these moments of meeting. Also that moment of playing alongside, you know, people from all over the world seeking refuge at Batch Farm, this incredible farmer slash writer called Roger, who took us on a tour of the land and said, you know, no one can really own this land, you know, this land that I've never really owned. And then we sat together in a circle, and this is how the piece ends, really. And Jason invited us to just listen and have this experience of being, and then slowly start playing. And then we sang together a Kurdish prayer to the clouds and to the wheat. And that's something that we never could have schemed or imagined at the beginning of this project. So it's just been full of crunches, walls, and so many gifts that are threaded into the piece.
We didn't even know what was going to happen in that workshop.
We had no idea.
I mean, that's what comes so beautifully through the work, the authenticity, you know, as much as it's crafted and it's, you know, the poetry and the curation, there is so much authenticity and, like you say, genuine and surprising and in the moment kind of elements to it. I just wanted to reiterate to people who are listening, who are now fascinated, no doubt, about the piece, that actually you can access, you can hear the piece, and we'll be on the Mendip National Landscape website, and we'll be presenting the link at the end, so you can go straight in. I recommend sort of some proper headphones to sort of go for a walk and have a good listen to it. So we'll get onto that in a minute. We are quickly drawing towards before we move into some questions, but I wondered whether you could maybe just feedback some of the experiences you had with some of the audiences and some of that, how the piece was received. I know there are some really nice stories, so if you wouldn't mind sharing some. You mentioned something, Jason, that you had some, you know, people had some incredible experiences, and what people said back to you.
Yeah, there was, I mean, to be honest, in the kind of in Sovereign, again, I felt more of an observer than kind of like, hey, yo, come and check this out. You know, I was very interested in just observing, you know, people's experiences of things without kind of having to explain anything. And like I said earlier, you know, there was like people that were just genuinely moved, you know, laughing, moved to tears. Also, you know, in the way that sound moved in the piece, you know, very much engaged in this kind of, you know, active listening, experience of, you know, following sounds and all of that stuff, you know, is like you're also watching people's brains, you know, interacting and experiencing, you know, their worlds, you know, with the stuff that's coming to them. So it was really profound. And also, you know, which I also feel is part of any artwork, is people's, you know, sort of, I'm not interested. I don't want to listen to this, you know, swearing, or, you know, completely like the fear of experiencing something. And I feel like, to be honest, personally, when I see these experiences of people sort of, it's also part of art. It's, you know, it's kind of like, it's that in itself is that great, that something is so strong that somebody says, I do not want to experience that. I don't want to put myself into that situation. And, you know, it's really sort of taught, it continues to teach me a lot, you know, about listening, both the said and the unsaid. And yeah, there was definitely a lot said.
And I think as well that talks to my unease personally as well about putting this thing in that shopping centre. So, you know, it was a completely dark room. There's black drapes with speakers all the way around the edges and a few kind of hay bales and beanbags in the middle, and that was kind of it. And, you know, we had conversations between the three of us where me as a kind of visual person, visual artist, if you like, that made me really uncomfortable, because I know that walking past that, and if someone invited me in to try and go into space to talk to Jason's point like that, I would feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think. So I kept saying, well, what are people going to see? What are the pictures we can show? What are the words we can put on the wall? What are the blah, blah, blah? And I think, you know, thank you, Jason, for persevering and hearing me out every time, and for ignoring me. It's it was the right thing. It was the right thing, because people had a very different experience. And so, you know, my kind of big takeout from watching people in there, and again, I kind of went a few times to just observe really how it was going and what people were feeling and how they were interacting with it, is that people were just absorbed, and totally absorbed in a very, very different way to if there would have been pictures there. So, you know, just, you know, families with very young kids, you know, 2, 3, 4-year-olds who were just laying on those beanbags, you know, not kicking up a fuss, not fidgeting, just completely absorbed in there with their parents next to them. And there was some multi-generational ones as well, Gwen, isn't there, that I think you encountered, that were just, you know, everyone was loving it, from the 2-year-olds to the 82-year-olds. And that, you know, for me, seeing people react to a, you know, purely audio piece like that was really, I was going to say eye-opening, but also ear-opening.
Ear-opening,
yeah. I just wanted to quickly comment on that, Chris. You're talking about those 3 generations of women, because that was the most moving thing for me. There was a granddaughter that had come back with 2 generations of her family, and her grandmother was completely blind. And the Mendip Hills had been so much a part of the last 30 years of her life. She'd been spending, she was from the West Country, grew up, I think, in Salcombe, but had not been out other than to go to the doctors in the last 2 years. So I had been completely unable to experience the land that had been so much a part of her history and her identity. And so to be able to come with, 2 generations of her family to sit and listen together, they were all crying by the end of it. And so was I, really. Like, what a gift to be able to experience that with them and hear it through their ears too.
Wow, that is a powerful story, and a real testament, I think, to your work and how you were able to capture, I mean, literally the sound, you know, from the cave to the thunderstorm to the tree dying, as well as the voices and the stories within the piece. So I really, it's a hugely congratulations to you all. We've absolutely loved this piece as being part of Nature Calling. So we've just got a couple of questions coming through, but please, you know, if you do have anything you want to ask the artist, please do. So one's coming up then. Are you continue to work with the people in the South Ward, and how can you further encourage their interest in nature?
Wow, Funnily enough, I'm working with Swan, Southward Activity Network, who are one of the grassroots organisation deeply embedded within the Southward community, and they have like these amazing relationships that are built over time. And we are with the National Landscape running a coach trip out to, I think we might even be walking now from the centre of Southward, and experiencing the view out part of the trail together, doing it as an interactive, creative trail. So young people and their families ending up in the quarry at Uphill. So we're going to have another experience together in a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited about that. And that's a wonderful legacy for me living in Weston of the project. These relationships that I've bought have been born with grassroots organisations here.
Yeah, and I should just say, the view out aspect of the project is still live. Just to give a little bit explanation around that. So we've created, National Landscapes have created these 3 trails in and around, so within Weston, and then 2 kind of within the Mendip, and you can, and there's sort of augmented reality, so you can just download a very simple app and you hold it up to the image and it creates this really crazy bit of animation, and you can also hear a bit of information around the champion species within the Mendip, which obviously, so the species within that locality, but also a really beautiful poem. Can you say a little bit about those poems, Gwyneth?
Yeah, they are written by kids, from young people from Windwhistle Primary School who we went on a walk with one of the rangers, Nathan, from National Landscapes in a woodland, and then we came back to embody the animals and came up collaboratively with these poems that Jason came in and recorded in the primary school in a sort of whirlwind embodiment theatrical workshop. Look at your face. Do you want to say anything about it? But they're amazing.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was amazing. And I guess these are the sort of also the things that people won't experience maybe when they hear the pieces, is, some of the sort of sounds and some of the emotional places and spaces that people were at, where we were, it's the pieces is a story, it's a storytelling, and we spent sort of 3 days together as a team arranging and crafting the story, and there was moments where it was literally like CSI jobs, having to sort of not just edit people's voices, but edit the emotion of how people were speaking, and so that things would flow, and credit to the young people, they were thrown into situations of, I've got to now become a dormouse. I don't even know what a dormouse looks like, and Gwyn, kind of actor trained, these characters. It was brilliant, to kind of to sort of see in such a short space of time how people can become other beings, with the right help and support. And having those part of that, augmented reality trail is so lovely, because you've got the science, you've got the facts and really beautiful stories, but then you've also got these kind of beautiful little tales by young people.
Yeah, they're really charming. And also it gives an opportunity to really encourage people to go out, and to find those trails. And I should just also say, you can find links to the maps to those trails and all the information around that on the Mendip Hills National Landscapes website, which we will give a link at the end. So yeah, that's a really lovely continuation, I think, of this project. And the Dormouse one in particular is just so charming. I think it's one of my favorites. So I don't know if there's any more questions out there. I mean, I think there's someone was just asking really about working collaboratively and working through some of the differences, I think, around your disciplines. We meant, I wonder if you could say anything about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a sound perspective, working with two additional artists who, yes, they work with sound and they work with visuals, but it felt, going out as a field recorder, a lot of the time you're on your own and, putting yourself in these environments. But there's so many times in this project where I had to check my ego, I had to check my own perspective of things, and also I fully and completely trusted, and trust, Gwyneth and Chris. So to be able to kind of be in situations where things were getting spiky and spicy and, sort of different perspectives or points of view, and then, going away, and because I always had like a 90-minute drive back to Devon. So in those times, I would think, should have checked myself, or actually need to look at from a different perspective, and all of that stuff really informs what you do as a creator, as a co-creator, and as a collaborator. When you really listen to the people, you listen to, and you have your own guidance and sort of things that you're led by strongly, but it's very much, and I think because we have the trust with each other to be able to kind of go, this is a huge learning experience that I'll take into other projects and other experiences, having been around two people that I absolutely adore, and I'm in awe of how they see the world and how they bring that world back to people.
Yeah, I think, yeah, to echo all that, it was about the listening and the trust are the kind of the two things that I think kind of went through this in terms of how we work together. I've worked with Jason before and a few things, but yeah, Gwyn, neither of us had worked with before, but very quickly it felt we were very much on on the same page, from those early difficult meetings where I think it was just very clear, like Jason said, we just kind of had each other's back where we needed to, but also where we could trust each other's process and trust that Jason's sound visions, that Gwyn and I had no idea what he was plotting or how he was going to do any of these things, that they'd come to fruition, that that Gwyn was taking all these words into a compost bin, and that they would at some point, like Gwyn said, fall out in some way. We didn't, truth be told, we didn't know what this was kind of right up until we all got together and did those 2 or 3 days at in Jason's studio to put it together. We'd collected all of these things, but we had to even at that last point really trust each other that we could pull something out of the bin in those last 2 or 3 days. And so I think there's a huge amount of trust, and yeah, as I say, kind of listening to each other, listening to the land. And I think that kind of just conversation that we had, and I think a big part of that was giving each other space. So we'd go and we'd do something, and then we would just kind of be with each other for a few hours afterwards, and just kind of let it come out in its own way as well. Talk about the experiences, talk about the feelings and what we'd heard and what what we were thinking. And again, at times that was there was some kind of difficult conversations. Some of us were in difficult personal situations throughout the project, or we'd been put in a difficult situation, but it was kind of letting that come out, listening to those difficult things, and just letting them be, and then trusting that each other would find a way to support the others and bring it all back out into the project.
I think for me, it's just been an extraordinary experience. I think any new collaboration is intrinsically vulnerable. You are meeting people in like a really intimate part of yourself. And these guys had worked together before, but there was like throughout so much willingness to return to our like unity of purpose, really. And then like surrender and be flexible. I think that as well, there were moments when I've just learned that when I know something or I'm certain about something, it means that I'm probably scared. So how can I let go of my certainty and meet something like Jason was talking about too, like in a new way, in a different way? And those moments of compromise, I'm so grateful to Jason for all of the unbelievable CSI work that he did in order that we could, within a very crazy time frame, actually invite those voices into the final piece. And it was huge amounts of work with the logistics that we had, but that felt important for me to advocate. And similarly, needing to let some things go and trust that those messages would come out in different ways, which they have sonically. So that constant like coming together, surrendering, coming together and surrendering and learning so much. And I just absolutely love this team, like beyond. And yeah,
Oh, I look forward to seeing you got guys working together in some form. Oh well, so I'm going to draw it to a close. We've got a couple of minutes just left, but thank you ever so much for today. Thank you for your honesty as well, and thank you for like bringing this project to life for all of us. So thanks ever so much. A round of applause from me, and no doubt I don't think there's any more questions, but if there is any other questions and you wanted to forward it to us, and we could maybe get it to the artists. There's also a feedback form if you wouldn't mind filling that in. I should quickly look at my notes. I'm just so carried away now chatting that haven't really done my final closing number. But so just to let everybody know that the 4th of this series will be on Wednesday, the 3rd of September. We'll take a bit of a break over August, and that will be with Matt Rosier, who's the commissioned artist for the Chilterns National Landscape, and he'll be talking about his project that was launched just on the weekend, actually, called Luton Henge. He'll be speaking with Matthew Shaw from Stone Club, and if you don't know who Stone Club is, they bring new perspectives really to prehistory in collaborative and inclusive ways. So it's a really interesting contemporary take on prehistory and Neolithic history around the country. So much what like everything that Luton Henge represents really. So so for more information, sign up for details. Details will be circulated at the end of the session, which I believe that there. I think some of those links to where we can find more about the work. And just to say that today's session has been recorded, and we'll be editing it down to a bite-sized sort of 20-minute podcast. They will be available on the website soon. I think we're sort of getting them together as a collection across all the 6. And please fill in the feedback form when it comes up. So thank you everybody for coming along, and thanks again to Jason, Chris and Gwyneth. I'll be seeing you soon, I hope. And hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Corinza.
Thank
Cheerio.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.